Happening. A good Tuesday to all of you. Thanks for joining me as always. It's very much appreciated. It's Tuesday morning as I record this. I got a dentist appointment a little bit later on today. I'm not too thrilled. It's just a cleaning. But I'm sitting down recording this before the trade deadline truly kicks in. I mean, we've got until 4 o'clock today Eastern time. So if something big happens, I will certainly jump on another podcast and react to that. I will very likely do that podcast live if it's big enough to do another one. So keep that in mind. But I think one of the bigger questions circulating throughout Patriots Nation and what Patriots fans are talking about today is whether or not Mac Jones should be traded. Would he be traded? Can he be traded? It's a very fascinating question to me. 2 or 3 weeks ago, I said that getting max value to build was one of the biggest things for the rest of this season for the Patriots to try to accomplish. Could they build max value? Because if you built max value, you could look at him and say he's a QB1. You feel good going into 2024. Mac making less than $3 million. It's a really good scenario for you. Now, if you wanted to pivot and move on from Mac, if he built up his value, then you're looking at a quarterback that could get possibly a second-round pick, maybe even in a crazy world, the first-round pick, depending on how that other team felt about Mac and where they were with their quarterback situation. 2-3 weeks ago, that was really a top priority. And today, I mostly feel the same way, but there is a caveat. If there's a team that's willing to give up a second-round pick for Mac Jones, I would pull the trigger. And I understand there's questions about buy-in, and I brought that up a couple of weeks ago. Do you bail on the rest of this locker room? But right now, when you're looking at this situation for this organization, you've got to think about 2024, 2025, 2026. It's no longer about, what's going to happen this week and next week. Last week told you an awful lot. The Buffalo Bills game gave you some hope. Last week was reality. That you versus really good teams, there's a big separation gap. But I'm not going to just hand Mac away. I'm not going to give him away because I still feel like that less than $3 million next year on the cap. And if you could find a way to build up his value, or if you could help him next year more than you've helped him ever before to see if you can get a lot out of him. There's still a situation that could play out where Mac doesn't necessarily fall apart the remainder of this season. You go into the offseason with the money and some really good draft picks. You build around Mac, and all of a sudden you're talking about a different Mac. And whether or not you believe that Mac could be the guy in the long term, you still go back to this idea of building his value. He would still, have value throughout the league, and he would have more value next season if those circumstances played out than he has right now. I'm hesitant to pull the trigger on any Mac trade because I honestly believe, and I think many of you would agree with this, whether you're pro-Mac, anti-Mac, whatever, you'd be selling Mac at his lowest point. And that's not what you want to do. Even if you want him out of here long-term, getting pennies on the dollar, not worth it. So if we're talking about a 4th-round pick, 5th-round pick, even a 3rd-round pick, I'm not pulling the trigger on that kind of a trade. But if you're telling me you could trade Mac Jones for a 2nd-round pick to a desperate quarterback-needy team, a lot of people bring up Minnesota. Kirk Cousins blows out his Achilles on Sunday. He's done for the rest of the year. Minnesota is 4-4. They really are kind of in a win-it-now mode. You've got a very smart offensive-minded head coach in Kevin O'Connell. Mac is similar to Kirk Cousins as far as style of play. Cousins has a stronger arm, no doubt. But they're similar quarterbacks. And yes, it would be very difficult for the Vikings to plop Mac into that system and all of a sudden he's just playing great football or he's playing good enough football to lead that team to a victory in the first week and go on a string of wins. But if you're Minnesota and you're desperate and you feel like this is our time to try to take a shot here, we're 4-4. We could get to the playoffs, carry that momentum that we were able to attain last season. If the Vikings, and I don't think they're going to be in that frame of mind, but if you're asking me, should the Patriots trade Mac Jones, this is the scenario that I would say yes to. If you had a quarterback-needy team who was desperate enough to give up a 2nd-round pick, because the return on investment isn't that bad at that point. You never want to swing and miss on a first-round quarterback. But if you could trade Mac, who was drafted 15th, to a Minnesota, and you get a second-round pick, right now, today, that second-round pick would be the 51st pick in the draft. Not terrible. You're in the middle of the second round. And if you're the Patriots, and this is how I would think, you trade Mac Jones to Minnesota. Minnesota's not going to be as good with Mac right now as they were with Kirk. Again, the transition, how Mac is playing right now, different conference, different division, different coaching staff, all of those things. Different scheme, all of those things play a gigantic role in this. But if you're the Patriots, if you're Bill Belichick and you're sitting there looking at this, you're saying to yourself, I don't think Minnesota is going to be as good with Mac as they were with Kirk Cousins. So that second round pick might actually creep up to the top 10 in the second round. So if a team is willing to give up a pick like that, then absolutely. And I understand the risk with the buy-in. I truly do. I understand that the locker room may be looking at that kind of a trade and saying, man, the coaching staff is quitting on us. But the way Mac is playing and the way this offense is playing, I don't think that there's any kind of delusional visions in that locker room. I think this is a locker room that truly understands how tough this season is going to be. They lost Judon, they lost Gonzalez, they lost Kendrick Bourne. They've had a number of injuries on the offensive line. The quarterback's not playing well. The defense isn't playing well. They know the reality. They know the reality, and I would have to trust that guys would want to play with pride for their jobs and that rookies would still try to develop because they have a career that they've got to play for. And you still have guys in that locker room that can lead like Matthew Slater and others. Jabril Peppers is another name. So, I understand the risks, but I think getting a second-round pick for Mac Jones would outweigh those risks, and you would have to pull that deal off. The return on investment, not bad. And when you're looking at this offense moving forward, going back 2 or 3 weeks ago, things evolve, things change. And as things evolve, opinions can be fluid or opinions can change based on the circumstances that you deal with today rather than the circumstances you were dealing with a month ago. I'll give you an example. I like the Juju signing. I saw Juju as an upgrade over Jacoby Myers. Did I know Juju had one leg? No. If I knew Juju was just damaged goods and was going to be on one leg for at least the first half of this season, I would have said, there's no way I would sign that guy. There's no way I would take him over Jacoby. As we learn new information, right? Well, over the past couple of weeks, you have now lost Kendrick Bourne for the season. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I said, continue to build that chemistry. Hold on to Kendrick Bourne. See if you can get Mac feeling more confident with his true number one guy, a guy that he trusts. But now Kendrick Bourne's done for the season. And you've got a quarterback that's looking at a 6th-round pick, a one-legged Juju, a 2nd-round pick that's proven nothing in the league, a 6th-round pick that's proven nothing. Pharaoh Brown is now the 2nd tight end on this team, according to the snap counts this past weekend. And your offensive line, your best offensive lineman, Trent Brown, he's playing on one leg. So how much confidence do we have that this offense is going to turn the corner with the problems we've already seen them have? And then you include this idea that Bourne is out for the rest of the year and Trent Brown is hobbling around on one leg. I mean, how much confidence does that instill? I don't have nearly as much optimism right now as I did maybe 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago. And the idea of Mac being able to rebuild his value this season based off of those injuries and those circumstances. At this point in time, I would say it is very unlikely that Mac Jones would get to a consistent above average level with what he has to work with the rest of this year and the way that he has looked. He's been very inconsistent. I've left the door open that Mac, his time here, it might be over. As I said, after that New Orleans game, after the Raiders game, Mac might never get back to the guy who I thought he could be. He might never get back to that rookie season Mac. And we can argue about why that is on another day. But you're just looking at a player right now in a vacuum with value on trade deadline day. And if somebody's offering me a 2nd-round pick for the quarterback that I've seen the last month to go along with, the progress that I thought could be made that is likely now not going to be made due to several factors. And the idea that Mac actually might continue to play at a below average level, if not just a stink level, because again, what he's working with. So things evolve. And if you're the Patriots, you want to build draft capital. If you get a second round pick, that gives you more shots at a quarterback. If you don't end up in the top 5, but you have 2 second round picks, and one of those second round picks is your own, which should be pretty high if things go the way that it looks like they're going to go, then you would have the option to maybe draft a quarterback at the top of the second round or move up into the bottom of the first round. It gives you more bites at the apple. It gives you more opportunity. It gives you a chance to trade up. It gives you a chance to just stick and pick in the early second round with this Minnesota pick, hypothetically, and maybe land a quarterback that you think is going to end up being a QB1, but you're going to take your time with that player. You're going to develop that quarterback, and you go out and you sign a free agent quarterback, and you have a quarterback competition with that guy you drafted in the second round and somebody else that is a veteran. And I know Baker Mayfield's been thrown around a lot. Somebody like that. That is an avenue you can choose. It gives you more opportunities. And with the idea of trying to get opportunity and draft capital and trying to build the assets within this team's infrastructure as we get ready for, a build, a rebuild, a reset, whatever you want to say it's going to be, as you build that draft capital, you now have Will Grier, Bailey Zappi, who I do not think give you a better chance to win than Mac Jones. And I think that's a good thing. The hope meter's at 1%. It's on life support. I said that yesterday. If you have Grier, Zappi out there playing against teams that are better than the Patriots, you're likely going to get throttled. If you're playing against mediocre to bad teams, you could lose those games easily or more easily with Zappi and Grier than you would with Mac. And for people saying, oh, come on, Mac has stunk, blah, blah, blah. Look, Bailey Zappi was released before this season, okay? The Patriots have made it known to the world they don't believe in Bailey Zappi. If they believed in Bailey Zappi, he'd be playing right now. Simple. Will Grier hasn't been good enough or doesn't know enough about the offense just yet to leapfrog Bailey Zappi, which should tell you an awful lot because of what I just said about Zappi. And Malik Cunningham was just released last week. So I think it's obvious that the Patriots feel Mac Jones is their best chance to win. If you remove that, it gives you a better chance to lose, which would ensure, I believe, a top 5 or 6 pick in the draft. And now you're in that ballpark of being able to draft a Drake May or a Caleb Williams. So these are different things you have to think about. Mac has not done nearly enough for me or anyone to say it doesn't matter what the other team offers and drop a rock. It doesn't matter. He hasn't been nearly good enough to say that. He could certainly be shot. He could certainly need a new start somewhere else. I am not confident enough that Mac is going to turn this thing around to turn away a second round pick. Again, third round pick, fourth round pick. I'm sticking with Mac, and I'm hoping I'm able to recoup his value, and I look towards 2024 and see if I can get the most out of him. All right, those are my thoughts about Mac Jones and whether or not the Patriots should trade him. Don't forget Apple Pod, Spotify, rate and review. Also on YouTube, just take a second. We get 1,000 views, 1.5 thousand views, 2,000 views on some of these videos, and we get 200 likes. If you're watching the video and you like what we do here, give us that thumbs up. If you like the idea of an alternate, opportunity for your Boston sports listening pleasure and viewing pleasure, give us that thumbs up. If you've been sitting around waiting for an alternative, we can be that, but we need more eyeballs. And the way we do that is thumbs up on YouTube, commenting on YouTube, and also subscriptions. Still gunning for that 1,000 mark by tonight. We're getting closer and closer. Every person out there counts. I appreciate your support. All right, before we get into a fascinating article on the Red Sox GM search that popped up late last week from Sean McAdam, I want to talk about one more thing regarding the Patriots, and that's how much should these injuries be considered when we talk about this season and how bad this season has gone. Matt St. Jean, who is the co-host of the Pats Nation pod, he posted this on X over the last day or two. Here's New England's depth chart from June from our lads. Players marked in red missed multiple weeks with injuries. Players marked in orange missed a single week. And then he posts, this image explains a lot of why the Patriots are 2-6. Now, I don't need to go through all of them. We know the injuries. But just looking at Matthew Judon, Christian Gonzalez, now Kendrick Bourne, and the offensive line shuffle that's had to happen due to these injuries, I do think it is a question that could be asked and maybe even should be asked, and it's a legitimate, credible one to ask, how much these injuries truly impacted this Patriots team. It would be disingenuous for me to sit here and tell you the injuries have had no impact. I go back to 2011 Patriots versus the Giants, second Super Bowl. You can't tell me that the Patriots lose that game if Rob Gronkowski is healthy. You just can't tell me that. That impacted the game. That fundamentally changed the Patriots offense. So I'm not one of these people, these talking heads, these pundits, these podcast hosts, these sports talk show hosts. I'm not one of those guys or women that will sit there and tell you that injuries don't matter, next man up, blah, 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 blah. Because inevitably, when the levee breaks, the levee breaks. And when you have to replace somebody that is top-notch, top-tier talent with somebody who's not, that affects and impacts the football team. So it would be disingenuous for me to sit here and tell you that these injuries did not impact this team at all. Of course they did. Of course this offense would look better if they had better offensive line play, if those guys were healthy, if they could have a set five up front. Of course it would help. Of course the pass rush would be better with Matthew Judon. Of course your coverage would be better if you had Christian Gonzalez, who looked like an absolute lockdown corner to start this season. Of course, all of that is true. And of course, injuries matter. The question is, how much do those injuries matter when you're looking at this specific team and how things have gone? I don't think the injuries would have changed the math enough to make this a playoff team. I don't think if you're fully healthy that we're looking at a team that is 5-3, 6-2. I don't even think you're looking at a team that's 4-4 if they were healthy. I think you could be 3-5. And maybe if everything fell the right way, you could argue possibly 4-4. But I still think we'd have a lot of questions about this team and a lot of questions about the construction of the roster and some of the things that were not done in the offseason that should have been done in the offseason. There are still questions. I mean, before this season kicked off, I said this was an 8-win team. I bumped that up to 9 wins after the Aaron Rodgers injury, thinking that the Patriots would now sweep the Jets season series. They'd go 2-0. So I thought this team was an 8-win team. Best case scenario, 10 wins if everything went glowingly and you were completely healthy. And I bumped it up to 9 wins, most likely, after the Rodgers injury, because I still thought that this roster had holes, and I still thought with the strength of schedule this team was going to face, it was going to be an uphill climb. Let's not forget, you had Judon, you had Gonzalez, you had Kendrick Bourne, you had a lot of these guys until the Dallas game. The Dallas game was the falling off the cliff moment. It was the falling off the cliff moment for Mac. It was the falling off the cliff moment for the offense. It was falling off the cliff for the defense as well with Christian Gonzalez's injury early in that game. And then for some stupid reason, Bill Belichick still had Matthew Judon in the game, down 30 points or so, which was egregious in the fourth quarter. It was a dumbass mistake in coaching decision, which cost Matthew Judon likely the rest of this season. But up until that Dallas game, we still saw issues, right? We still saw issues. I don't think with a healthy team, you could say that you're winning that game in Dallas. That was blowout city. I don't think you could say that you're winning the game against New Orleans. That was blowout city. Your team looked like a broken ass team. And some of that had to do with the injuries, but it was a very small part of it. You know, you don't all of a sudden bring in a couple of guys and you go from losing a game, by 38 points or 35 points, 34 points. You're not getting outscored 72-3 just because of injuries. Okay. That would be an outrageous take. So you're still losing those two games. You might have won. You might have been able to win in Vegas. Miami this past weekend might have been closer, but you still lose. So the only game to me that you could argue would have been a shift enough for me to believe that you would have won was maybe the Raiders game, which gets you to 3-5. So 3-5, 2-6. Would you be better? Yes, you would be a better team. Would this team be more fun to watch if they were healthy? Yes. Would they be more competitive for longer stretches? Yes. Would they have been blown out as bad in Dallas? I don't know. Mac looked broken and was broken on that day, so same thing with the Saints. Now, maybe if the offensive line was a little bit better, but there are still issues. There's this lack of overall talent. And the fact that this team can't adjust or get better in certain areas should tell you that. Like Matthew Judon goes down. Josh Uche remains a sub-pass rusher, a guy who's going to be thrown out there on third down. Without Judon, he's not nearly as effective. You still have pass rush issues because Matthew Judon went down. And that, to me, symbolizes a lack of depth. Not that I expect somebody to come in and replace Judon and do Judon things, but I do expect you to have at least a third or fourth rotational pass rusher that could get home to the quarterback consistently. And Keon White missed 1 week, so I'm not going to sit here and go crazy about Keon White and the concussion that he had. He's out I think it was 1 week, maybe it was 2. It's all a blur. This season's been so bad. So the pass rush, you still need a ton of blitz. When you had Matthew Judon, you were still blitzing a ton because you could not get home with your front four. That's a problem. And that problem would have existed with or without Judon because we saw that it was existing with Judon. Christian Gonzalez gone. You bring in J.C. Jackson, a smash glass option because you drafted Jack Jones, who was unreliable off the field with his track record. You decided to draft Jack Jones. You decided to draft Marcus Jones, who is a small guy, who is more injury prone because he's not a big dude. You drafted Uche and you relied on Uche last year to be, that pass rusher out of substitution situations, but you drafted a defensive end and you swung and missed when it comes to system because Uche doesn't fit your system. He can't play all 3 downs. He doesn't contain the edge, which is what you need from your defense. That problem would still exist. You failed to replace Devin McCourty, which forced your hand to try to put Kyle Duggar back there, which limited the impact of Duggar. You put Duggar more in the box over the past couple of weeks, and wouldn't you know, Duggar's making more plays. But you still would have made that decision if your team was healthy. You still would have rolled Duggar back there to free safety. It still would have been a problem. He still would have messed up a number of times. This defense still would have given up some big plays in the secondary, with or without Christian Gonzalez. As good as Gonzalez was and I believe is going to be. Your wide receivers still wouldn't be able to consistently separate. You would still have to scheme this offense and scheme these guys open for the most part. Your offensive line, even though it's been incredibly banged up, that was no guarantee. Your right tackle options weren't good to begin with. You were banking on Cole Strange improving. Now, maybe Cole Strange didn't improve as much as we thought because of the injury, or maybe Cole Strange didn't improve because he's not big on the bottom, doesn't have a great anchor, and will struggle from time to time. I'll tell you what, injuries and health have nothing to do with Cole Strange consistently missing blitzes up the middle like he did against Miami. So your offensive line still would have had questions. We know Trent Brown's history. David Andrews has an injury history. Mike Uwenu, he had surgery during the offseason. It was at least a question whether or not he'd be back early and if he looked like the same guy, and he has not looked like the same guy. Ramondre Stevenson still would have looked not like Ramondre Stevenson early on this season. Looked more like Ramondre last weekend. But for whatever reason, the first 7 weeks of the season, he mostly looked like he was in a coma. Those things would have remained the same. So does it impact this season? Yes, it impacts the season. It would be ridiculous for me to tell you that the injuries and the amount of injuries and to the guys that have been injured, that it doesn't impact this year. It does, but I don't think it impacts this year tremendously. I don't think you see a completely different football team if they were healthier. I think you're still looking at 3-5. Best case scenario, everything falls into place 4-4. I still think you finish the season with 8 or 9 wins. Not good enough to make the playoffs. All right. Rate and review. Apple Pod, Spotify. Don't forget about that. And the thumbs up. The thumbs up on YouTube mean an awful lot. Just 1 second of your time. Give us that thumbs up. Comment. Went back and forth with a lot of people yesterday. Some great traffic in the comments. Comment as well. And subscribe. Trying to hit 1,000 before the end of the day. Let's wrap up with some Red Sox. I thought Sean McAdam had a very fascinating article in Mass Live. I think it was last Friday. Didn't get to it because we had to preview the Patriots game. And then, of course, yesterday was the recap of that game and everything else going on. But there were several disturbing aspects in this story from Sean about the Red Sox GM search and how the process went. First of all, the Red Sox were surprised that so many people turned them down. Sean wrote, one industry source confirmed it's fair to say the Red Sox were initially surprised by the number of rejections they received. Now, remember, Sam Kennedy, after they fired Chaim Bloom, came out and said, this is the Boston Red Sox. If you want to run a baseball organization, this is where you want to be. Inflated ego, right? Inflated ego, delusional belief of where they actually are and what their reputation is currently in the game, how people feel about them, how people feel about this ownership. That is somebody who's incapable of looking in the mirror and realizing it. And I'm not saying publicly because, look, did he go over the top? Yes. But you would expect somebody like Sam Kennedy to say, oh, the Red Sox are a great opportunity. I mean, it's part of his business, right? But for the behind the scenes people, for this stuff to happen behind the scenes, to have people surprised behind the scenes that they got turned down so much, tells you that this ownership group has an inflated value of what this team is right now. And they're not seeing what they truly are. They're in the bubble. They're so far deep in the Red Sox bubble that nobody outside of that bubble can penetrate it, and nobody inside the bubble wants to get outside the bubble to say, hey, we're not good enough. Our reputation right now in the game is not great. John, your reputation isn't awesome. People don't believe in you. So I think that really tells us about where the ownership and the tippity top of the management team, where their minds were entering into this search. They thought they were going to get a top-notch candidate. They believed that somebody who would be exciting, invigorating, would say yes to this job. That they would get an inspiring choice and fans would be throwing a parade in the streets. Wasn't the case. Took a while for Breslow to be the guy, according to Sean McAdam. Breslow was on the Red Sox radar almost from the outset, though at that point, he was hardly considered any sort of favorite or frontrunner. Sean writes, as the process got underway, he was identified as someone who was at the very least worth speaking to. Yeah, we'll give him a phone call. And I want to make this clear. This is not a shot at Breslow. This is not telling you that the Breslow hire is not going to work. I'm simply looking at the process. I'm looking at the GM search and how rough it was. This is an indictment on what led up to this process, what led up to this search by this ownership group. This is an indictment of that and not Breslow being the guy. I want to make that clear. You know, Sean says as the process wore on, the Red Sox could not identify any of the other candidates as suitable number ones to oversee Breslow in the second chair. So When they initially brought up Breslow, it was like, yeah, we might as well have a conversation with the guy. When they talked to Breslow, they still weren't completely sold. When they thought about Breslow deeper, they said to themselves, well, he'd be a good second chair, but they couldn't find a number one chair. After the candidates said thanks, but no thanks, after the process went on for a few weeks, the Red Sox realized we don't have a better option. This is where we are. We're either promoting from within or we're going to hire a guy who we think would be better as the second in command instead of the first in command. That's where this process was. They were still looking at other options up until the week before Breslow was hired. They were still trying to get Kim Ng in for an interview. They were hoping against hope. And so they were still trying to find somebody who would be better than Breslow in their eyes. And they said, if we can't do better, let's just go with Craig. According to Sean McAdam, that's what happened. So who were the finalists? This is brutal. This tells you about the process. The three finalists, according to Sean McAdam in Mass Live late last week for the Red Sox GM job or chief baseball officer, Breslow, Twins GM Thad Levine, and current Cleveland consultant and former Pirates GM Neil Huntington. Huntington had literally two of the worst trades in baseball recent history. Thad Levine, the guy who's the number 2 in Minnesota, who has plenty of questions around him. So out of that list, if those were the three finalists, I'm all in on Breslow. I am all in on Craig Breslow. If we're talking about Neil Huntington or Craig Breslow 10 times out of 10. So this is the issue. The issue is with the Red Sox ownership, how they have fired guys over and over and over again in that position. Dave Dombrowski wins a World Series, and they give him almost no time after that. They cut him loose. I mean, this is what the ownership is known for. Henry not necessarily spending nearly as much as he used to spend. Does Henry even care about the baseball team, or is he wrapped up in other ventures for that Fenway Sports Group? So, this is what happens. The reputation has been damaged to the point where your three finalists was a guy who you really felt should have been a number 2 in Thad Levine and Neil Huntington. It's brutal. It's brutal. How about a senior advisor? I talked about that after the Breslow hire, right? I thought it'd be a great idea to bring in a senior advisor. Well, Sean writes, it's also possible Breslow could hire a more experienced senior advisor. However, the Red Sox baseball operations is already bloated in the eyes of some, and adding another hire could prove problematic. Gross. If your Red Sox baseball operations staff is too bloated, trim the freaking fat. What's a priority here? To get the top of the chain correct? Or to hire and keep as many people hired as possible because they've been in the building for years? How many people do you have working in analytics? How many people do you have in the scouting department? How many people do you have in this front office? Look at the numbers and trim some of the fat. It is much more important to bring in somebody who could be seen as a senior advisor of a guy doing the job for the first time in Craig Breslow than it is worrying about the bottom 4, 5, or 6 people in the front office. And look, I hate people losing their jobs. And I don't want people losing their jobs. Trust me, I'm unemployed right now. I get it. But priorities are priorities. To me, having a top senior advisor, a Bill LaJoy type from back in the day with Theo, and you could go on, there's been others. If you bring in somebody like that for Breslow, that is much more significant than the lower level people of the organization. It's too bloated. Set a priority list. Give Breslow some help. it will give you a better chance that he succeeds so we don't have to go through this ridiculous process 3 years from now. Like, what the hell are you doing? Unbelievable. Breslow was the number 3 guy in Chicago. Get him somebody that has experience to help him with certain things that he has not done before. And Eddie Romero, okay, he can help. But Eddie Romero has never been the top guy in an organization either. Promote Eddie Romero as GM, hire a senior advisor, and those 2 guys, along with Craig Breslow, are the tippity top of your front office. This isn't hard. All right. Again, if something big happens at the trading deadline, we will be back to break that down. If not, we'll be back tomorrow to talk about more Patriots, maybe mix in some Bruins, maybe mix in some Celtics, maybe mix in some more Red Sox. It's Boston. It's busy. We'll see what we do. Until then, thank you for supporting this program. It's the Nick Cattle Show.